I'm Sam Charinka, and the title of my performance is Emmeline Pankhurst, a British rights suffragette. I've done so much with my life, from helping improve workhouse conditions, to going on hunger strikes, to never giving up hope. I don't want people to forget, but how do I make them remember? Maybe it's time I should start writing that autobiography I've always wanted to write. I mean, I am 52 and I still haven't written a single word. Let's start with the preface. In writing this history of the militant women's suffrage movement, I have endeavored to give a just and accurate account of it. Now for chapter 1, how I grew up. I was born into a Quaker family. I was born on July 14, 1858 in Manchester, England. My birth certificate wasn't filed until 4 months after, so many think I was born on the 15th, when really I was born on the 14th. My father, Robert Godin, was the man that sparked my interest in politics. He made me read the newspaper to him every morning, and hearing all the problems in my country made me want to help. He owned a very successful calico printing business, which allowed me to live in a nice home. As for my mother, Sophie Godin, well, she was my whole inspiration. At the age of 14, she brought me to my very first women's rights convention, and I remember being so inspired by all these women's speeches. I went to convention after convention, and soon realized that's what I wanted to do with my life. I also realized my parents weren't very interested in my education, but more so my brother's. Now that should bring me to chapter 2, schooling and marriage. After realizing my education wasn't important to my parents, I decided to make them send me to a very progressive women's school in France, instead of the rubbish boarding schools here in England. I stayed at that school until I was 20, and I learned fluent French, and not only sewing and embroidery, but bookkeeping and chemistry as well. Soon after I returned, I met my amazing husband, Richard Pankhurst, a radical attorney from Manchester. Richard was much older than me, but that didn't faze me. He was a very strong supporter of women's rights, and he also supported the Home Rule for the Irish and the radical notion of abolishing the monarchy. Richard and I got married in 1879 when I was only 21 and he in his mid-40s. When Richard and I struggled financially, I went to my father for help, and he refused, and I never spoke another word to him again. Oh, me and Richard made a great pair. We both fought for women's rights together and even formed the pressure group, the Women's Franchise League, a society aimed at women to vote for women. When Richard and I moved to Manchester, we formed the branch of the Independent Labour Party. For several years, Richard had suffered from gastric ulcers, but towards the end of 1897, they started getting worse, and he sadly passed away on July 5th, 1898. For his gravestone, I chose a Walt Whitman quote, "Faithful and true, my loving comrade." Oh my, I haven't even written any of that down. Now for chapter 3, my children. Richard and I had 5 children between 1880 and 1889. I had 3 daughters and 2 sons. My daughters were Christabel, Sylvia, and Adelea, and my sons were Frank and Harry. I'm ashamed because I spent most of my time with Christabel, who may or may not have been my favorite, and the rest of them spent a lot of time with nannies. I regret this deeply because when Frank was 4, he died suddenly of diphtheria. Soon after, I was named to the board of poor law guardians, whose job it was to supervise the local workhouses. I was dumbfounded by all these inhabitants' conditions. They were fed and clothed terribly, wearing nothing but scraps in both winter and summer, and at night, they wore little to nothing. And these young children, by young I mean 7 or 8 years old, were there scrubbing floors and cleaning. And women did all the work too. These 70 to 80-year-old women were there scrubbing floors and cleaning and sewing, while the men did little to nothing. And these old men and women were sitting on hard benches and backless chairs. So I did as much as I could to improve these conditions. And within 5 years, I had established a school in the workhouse. I am proud of my accomplishments, but it still pains me to think about all those children left there, many not even knowing their mothers as they were given to the house as babies. And now is the main part of my life, the founding of the Women's Social and Political Union. I founded this group in Manchester in 1903. Along with the National Union of Women's Suffrage Society, we fought for the right for women to vote in a country where it was denied. Yes, we were allowed to vote in local elections and act on the school board, but we weren't very equal in political rights. Many people depended on the Independent Labour Party for our cause, but I wanted more commitment from the Independent Labour Party. From the start, we wanted to live by our motto, deeds, not words. I spoke at many rallies, and at one of them, I even read an 11-page speech called Deeds Not Words. In 1906, when the Asquith's Liberal Party came to power, the hopes of the Women's Social and Political Union were raised simply because this Liberal Party was seen as the party that would pioneer women's rights in Britain. The Liberal Party, by the very nature of liberalism, should help to put a push in political rights. Militancy, violence with political standing, became very common in regards to our actions. Some of our very first militant actions were buttonholding politicians and holding rallies. By 1907, the newspapers and reporters started getting bored with our cause. They stopped reporting and putting our stories in newspapers. This caused our actions to get more extreme, and then following these actions, many of us were arrested, myself included. I was arrested multiple times. Then hunger strikes started, which resulted in terrible force feedings and early releases for many prisoners. I remember my first hunger strike. It was 1912, and I was arrested for throwing a rock at the Prime Minister's window. I was sentenced to prison for 9 months. I went on a hunger strike, which resulted in a terrible force feeding, which meant a tube shoved forcefully down my throat and liquid poured down it. It was a horrible experience, but I was ready to do whatever I could for my cause, and I still am. I was released early, but then a law was passed saying any prisoners who were released early for medical reasons could be taken back. So myself and many other women were taken back many times. I, of course, had to stop militancy because we did need a country to vote in. When World War I started, I persuaded women to take up war efforts and fill in factory positions for the men that went off to fight in World War I. Our contributions in war efforts helped us gain some more voting rights if we were 30 and met a property requirement. I still am waiting for the day where women will become fully equal in political rights. Maybe it'll happen soon. I surely hope it does. Oh my, I forgot I'm supposed to be writing my autobiography. I haven't written any of that down. Just going to write one thing down now so I don't forget. Women are slow to arouse, but once they are aroused, once they are determined, nothing on earth and nothing in heaven can make them give way. It is impossible. Emmeline Pankhurst died in London on June 14, 1928. Sadly, Emmeline didn't get to see the day where women became fully equal in political rights. She went through so many conflicts in her life, from getting arrested and going on hunger strikes, just to miss her whole life's work come together. The rights were passed on July 2nd, 1928. Without Emmeline's hard work and dedication, this compromise wouldn't have been made. In the wise words of Miss Pankhurst, we are here, not because we are lawbreakers, we are here in our efforts to become lawmakers.